things like that will change, and how we are part of the support for the monarchy may change slightly.
A closed-door meeting regarding the late Queen Elizabeth II's colossal fortune reportedly spiraled into a fierce showdown within the British royal family. Having inherited the lion's share of his mother's private estate, King Charles III convened a high-stakes discussion to determine the future of several assets carrying immense sentimental value. But in a move that blindsided everyone, Queen Camilla unexpectedly threw her own daughter's name, Laura Lopes, into the mix. Whispers emerging from the palace suggest that Camilla proposed that Laura should receive a portion of the king's personal inheritance. However, the suggestion instantly hit a wall of fierce resistance from Princess Anne. Infuriated, Anne reportedly shut down the idea, immediately firmly asserting that Laura has absolutely no place in any royal inheritance plans. Yet what truly stunned the room into silence was when King Charles III himself stepped in. A number of sensitive matters regarding Laura were reportedly dredged up right in front of Camilla. Minutes later, Catherine's name suddenly surfaced as the prime candidate for a pivotal decision. Why did King Charles III side with Anne instead of backing his own queen's proposal? And what exactly did Catherine receive that left Camilla storming out of the meeting visibly consumed by bitter rage? 4 years had slipped by since that historic autumn day in 2022, when Queen Elizabeth II drew her final breath at Balmoral Castle, closing the chapter on a monumental reign and triggering a quiet shift beneath the surface of Buckingham Palace. 4 years was time enough for the public to grow accustomed to the presence of a new monarch, yet it was never quite enough to erase the fractures of power and interest within the House of Windsor. The late Queen's will remained a strictly sealed secret within royal vaults, but the administration of the lion's share of her colossal private estate, including the lucrative Duchy of Lancaster, worth hundreds of millions of pounds, had officially passed to King Charles III. On a summer morning in 2026, a closed-door meeting was convened in a small but secluded conference room at Clarence House, a space where the most sensitive decisions were often finalized before ever reaching the public eye. The purpose of this gathering was nothing less than to deliberate the fate of some of the most profoundly symbolic heritage items pieces that did not belong to the state, but were inextricably bound to the prestige and honor of the dynasty. Seated at the center was King Charles III, a man who had spent a lifetime waiting for the throne and was now bearing the full weight of the crown. Since his accession, he had strived to project a streamlined, cost-conscious image suited to the modern era, yet holding a massive private fortune from his late mother inadvertently placed him in a delicate position regarding domestic expectations. Right beside him, possessing a reserved yet unmistakably sharp demeanor, was Queen Camilla. Despite having achieved the highest station, an invisible insecurity always lingered in Camilla's heart concerning her 2 children from her previous marriage to Andrew Parker Bowles, particularly her daughter Laura Lopes, who stood entirely on the periphery of royal privilege. Facing the sovereign couple was Princess Anne, the king's only sister, a paragon of duty, bluntness, and absolute loyalty to traditional values. Anne, widely regarded as the hardest-working royal, with hundreds of engagements under her belt each year, invariably viewed matters through the cold, rational lens of a true conservative. The dynamic between her and her sister-in-law Camilla had long been a complex undercurrent, as Anne deeply valued legitimacy and the rigorous discipline of royal blood. At the corner of the table, silent yet exuding the graceful composure of a future queen, sat Catherine, the Princess of Wales. Since her marriage to Prince William in 2011, Catherine has navigated 15 years of immense media pressure, transforming herself into an irreplaceable symbol of elegance and responsibility, earning both the deep affection of the public and the absolute trust of the late Queen Elizabeth II. The moment senior aides finished presenting the private asset registries and withdrew, leaving the core family members in complete privacy, Queen Camilla unexpectedly nudged her antique porcelain teacup, the slight clink cutting through the silence. Avoiding Princess Anne's gaze, she directed a meaningful look toward her husband and began putting forward a proposal that seemed harmless but carried immense ambition. In a measured, well-rehearsed tone, Camilla suggested that in the future, distribution of these symbolically significant personal heirlooms, her daughter Laura Lopes should receive a deserving share. This move instantly caused King Charles III's fingers to freeze mid-turn over the documents, while Princess Anne's brow furrowed into a deep line across her stern face. Camilla argued that although Laura did not bear the Windsor name, she had quietly endured immense public scrutiny for decades and had remained her most steadfast pillar of support during her darkest hours, particularly the turbulent period leading up to the 2005 wedding. In her unspoken reasoning, recognition for Laura was a recognition of the Queen's own sacrifices. The abrupt proposal was like a stone tossed into a still lake, shattering the superficial harmony in the room, sending a flicker of surprise through Princess Catherine's eyes and igniting a tense gray spark that signaled an inevitable clash over the red lines of royal tradition. The silence that blanketed the conference room immediately following Queen Camilla's proposal was not one of consent, but rather the tense lull before a gathering storm. Recognizing the frozen reactions of those around her, Camilla did not back down. Instead, she deployed the composure forged through years of shifting fortunes to reinforce her position. Her gaze swept across the royal portraits lining the walls of Clarence House before settling on King Charles III. Her hands tightly clasped on the table in a display of resolve laced with a subtle plea. She began to articulate her reasoning in a slow, deliberate cadence that carried significant emotional weight. Deep down, Camilla had always harbored an invisible insecurity about her own children being sidelined from the realm of prestige, and she viewed this as the sole legitimate opportunity to secure a distinct acknowledgement for Laura Lopes, the daughter who had accepted a life in the shadows, enduring a barrage of public scrutiny ever since her mother's relationship with the Prince of Wales was exposed to the world. To Camilla, a fraction of this heritage was not merely material wealth, but a recompense for the emotional trauma Laura had weathered to ensure her mother's current happiness. However, the psychological shield Camilla had just erected was instantly shattered by the icy resistance from across the table. Princess Anne subtly straightened her back, a familiar gesture, whenever she was about to engage in a momentous debate. The piercing eyes of the king's only sister flashed with a cold, direct stare that locked firmly onto her sister-in-law's face. Without a single word, Anne's slight but definitive shake of the head and her stern, downturned lips signaled an absolute veto. In the ironclad mindset of a royal matriarch who had dedicated her entire life to crown duties under the towering shadow of Queen Elizabeth II, royal property, particularly items of symbolic value, was sacrosanct. They belonged to the throne to those of royal blood or to official working members bearing the daily burdens of the state, not to be handed out as sentimental gifts to outsiders. Anne's opposition did not stop at mere posture. It materialized in a series of powerful, expressive actions. She decisively nudged the registry folder to the side, as if to declare that Camilla's proposal did not even deserve to be on the agenda. Her gaze shifted from Camilla to King Charles III, delivering a silent yet steel-willed warning on matters of principle, favoring Laura Lopes, an individual completely devoid of titles, who performed no public duties and made no contribution to the monarchy, would be an affront to the palace hierarchy. Anne understood better than anyone that if the king acceded to this demand, it would set a highly dangerous precedent, shattering centuries of Windsor tradition and directly undermining the fragile credibility of the slimmed-down monarchy her brother was striving to build. The temperature within the conference room had now plummeted below, freezing growing so suffocating that the steady ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece was distinctly audible. The divide was starkly evident in the smallest movements of every member present. Princess Catherine subtly lowered her gaze, focusing her attention on her hands resting in her lap, deliberately maintaining an absolute neutrality to avoid being drawn into the vortex of conflict between the two most powerful women in the royal family. Meanwhile, King Charles III sat in silence, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the armrest of his regal chair, his face a portrait of profound inner turmoil torn between his devotion to the wife who had stood by him through the storms of life and the heavy burden of royal dogma his sister stood to protect. This clash of ideologies and interests had plunged the private summit into a suffocating stalemate where royal pride and ancient rules openly defied one another. In the face of the undercurrent storm threatening to erupt between the two women, King Charles III slowly rose from his velvet-upholstered chair, an authoritarian symbolic gesture to restore order to the room. The weight of the crown he had borne for the past 4 years seemed vividly etched into every line on his brow. The king took slow steps toward the large window overlooking the gardens of Clarence House, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. Within him, a fierce internal battle was raging. He understood the heart of Camilla, the wife who had tasted so much bitterness alongside him to achieve her current station. Yet as the head of a dynasty, he could not allow personal sentiment to override the rational lens of a monarch. He knew that every decision regarding the late queen's private estate, no matter how small, would be placed under the microscope of history and the public. As he returned to the conference table, King Charles III's gaze turned more solemn and distant than ever, locking directly onto Queen Camilla. His demeanor now was no longer that of an indulgent husband, but of a sovereign enforcing dynastic justice. With a definitive yet heavy nod, he made his position clear. The distribution of heirlooms carrying national symbolic weight could never be permitted to rely on fleeting emotions or private blood relations. He placed his hands flat on the mahogany table, a resolute movement that silently reasserted the boundary between the royal family and commoners as sacrosanct, and that Laura Lopes, despite being the queen's daughter, would forever remain on the outside of that line. The atmosphere grew increasingly suffocating as the king began to unearth hidden corners of the past matters that the royal family had always sought to conceal behind the fortified walls of the palace. His eyes narrowed slightly, betraying a sense of disappointment as he recalled the deep friction Laura had once caused with official working members. The details of how Laura, in years gone by, had secretly sought to undermine and tarnish the credibility of Princess Catherine before being found out by courtiers were once again resurrected through the king's stern frown. To Charles, that selfish and reckless behavior from Laura's past was not merely a fracture in domestic relations. It was an act that threatened the stability and image of those who would bear the future of the British throne. Witnessing the unyielding stance and the damning truths presented by her husband, the final glimmer of hope in Queen Camilla's eyes completely died out. Her shoulders slumped slightly under the weight of the rejection, and her fingers, which had been clutching a silk handkerchief, suddenly went slack in unconditional surrender. She realized that in this game of power and prestige, even the man who loved her most could not side with her when the interests of the dynasty were at stake. Camilla chose silence, keeping her eyes fixed on the table to hide her shock and bitterness, knowing that the proposal for her own daughter had completely shattered against the impenetrable fortress of royal tradition. The silent surrender of Queen Camilla closed a dark chapter of the debate, restoring to the conference room its inherent solemnity. As the shadow of Laura Lopes was entirely swept off the agenda, King Charles III let out a soft sigh, a discreet breath of a man who had just set aside personal affection to safeguard the greater good. He tapped the thick registry folder, signaling an inevitable shift in the meeting. The focus now was no longer on preventing a flawed precedent, but on finding the rightful solution for the late Queen Elizabeth II's deeply symbolic heirlooms. those priceless items could not remain forever in velvet boxes collecting palace dust. They required a worthy custodian, someone who could wear that mantle of prestige without tarnishing the reputation of the crown. The previous suffocating tension was swiftly replaced by a high-stakes deliberation over criteria. Princess Anne, having just triumphed in defending the royal boundaries, once again became the one guiding the room's train of thought. Her eyes skimmed through the notes, her mind continuously weighing core values, duty, dedication, and the role someone would play in the future of the dynasty. To Anne, a royal title was not a piece of jewelry for display, but a yoke of obligation that the bearer must pull for a lifetime without permission to tire. Stringent criteria were laid out, ranging from the volume of public engagements completed and the level of commitment to patronages to the ability to remain psychologically resilient under the terrifying pressure of the modern media, a wordless battlefield ready to crush anyone weak of heart. While the discussion revolved around these highest standards, the Princess of Wales maintained an astonishing composure. Catherine sat straight, her hands gently clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed intently on the documents without betraying the slightest hint of ambition or impatience. It was precisely this patient's uncompetitive demeanor that further accentuated her powerful grace. Witnessing this expression, Princess Anne offered a discreet, subtle smile. With a decisive movement, Anne placed her finger on the roster of senior royals and put forward a landmark proposal. She asserted that considering both her 15 years of unwavering devotion and the fervent affection she received from the public, no one in this room, or indeed within the entire House of Windsor, was more suited than Catherine to inherit these symbolic heirlooms. Princess Anne's proposal acted like a key unlocking ultimate consensus. King Charles III gave a gentle nod, his expression softening as he looked at his eldest daughter-in-law, who had always been a steadfast pillar for Prince William and a symbol of stability during the royal family's most vulnerable periods. Approval quickly rippled through the room by way of subtle nods from attending advisors and family members. Everyone understood that entrusting the legacy to Catherine was not merely a reward for her personal dedication, but a powerful political message sent to the public of a secure future, seamlessly continuing the values that the late Queen Elizabeth II had left behind. The unspoken consensus within the conference room swiftly crystallized into a historic official decision. Under the chairmanship of King Charles III, the Royal Council proceeded with the final approval formalities, formalizing the transfer of ownership of several precious jewelry pieces from the late Queen Elizabeth II's private collection to the Princess of Wales. These treasures, from a glittering diamond necklace to intricately crafted sapphire brooches, were not merely luxury items, but the embodiment of historical continuity and the supreme authority of the British monarchy. As the detailed inventory was approved, each council member quietly signed the memorandum, the rhythmic scratching of pens sounding like the ticks of time, etching a new chapter into the annals of the House of Windsor. In that fateful moment, Queen Camilla could no longer maintain her invisible resignation. The pride of a woman who had tasted endless bitterness to reach the pinnacle of power compelled her to make one final desperate effort. Camilla subtly straightened her hand, gripping the edge of the precious wooden table so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She attempted to use a heavy pressuring gaze and expressive gestures to reverse the tide, silently signaling her own years of contribution as a reason to retain those treasures, or at least to downsize the scale of the gift intended for Catherine. Yet all her efforts yielded nothing but cold indifference from the surrounding space. Not a single courtier directed their eyes toward her, and even her closest allies chose to look down and avoid her gaze, leaving the Queen isolated in the vortex of her defeat. Camilla's isolation reached its absolute peak when the official decision was passed with the total agreement of King Charles III and the senior advisors. The king took his fountain pen and signed his approval with a decisive stroke of ink, without a single moment of hesitation, or a backward glance at his deeply disappointed wife. The king's act of signing was the final punctuation mark to all undercurrent disputes, a firm reassertion that before the core interest of the dynasty, all personal privileges must give way. The royal advisors stood respectfully on either side, bowing their heads in welcome of the decision, their collective unity acting like a fortified wall, enclosing the choice of Catherine, rendering any further resistance from Camilla entirely futile. As the red velvet box containing the symbolic jewelry pieces was respectfully slid toward the Princess of Wales, an invisible yet powerful wave of emotion swept through the room. Catherine subtly bowed her head to receive it, her eyes lowered to conceal her profound emotion, yet her shoulders remained perfectly square in a highly resolute posture. Possession of the late Queen's treasures was not only a supreme honor, but the official acknowledgement from the King and the Council of her unique, inviolable status in the future of the British royal family. From this moment on, the mantle of the late Queen Elizabeth II had officially transitioned onto the shoulders of the future queen, firmly anchoring her roots of power beneath the foundations of the palace, transforming her into an unshakable symbol of the dynasty's continuity and endurance. The agonizingly drawn-out minutes of the high-stakes meeting were finally brought to a formal, unyielding close with the heavy pressing of a royal red wax seal. The dull, resonant thud of the metal stamp echoed sharply through the suffocating stillness of the room, acting as an immutable exclamation point that marked the exact historical moment Catherine, the Princess of Wales, officially became the sole heir to the most symbolically significant and invaluable heirlooms from the late Queen Elizabeth II's private collection. The bright, unforgiving summer sunlight streamed relentlessly through the grand glass windows of Clarence House, dancing across the polished surfaces of the room, and brilliantly illuminating the red velvet box that lay perfectly still before Catherine. It sat there like a silent, centuries-old witness to history, its pristine fabric housing treasures that carried the very weight of the monarchy's enduring legacy. Nearby senior advisors and royal courtiers began the quiet ritual of gathering their voluminous documents and thick leather-bound folders. They moved with measured precision, offering subtle deferential bows toward the sovereign, their collective posture radiating a palpable, profound sense of relief that such a volatile and deeply sensitive domestic crisis had been successfully diffused and smoothly resolved behind closed doors. Conversely, on the exact opposite side of the long mahogany conference table, a completely antithetical and dark atmosphere was rapidly condensing, wrapping around Queen Camilla like a suffocating shroud. To Camilla, this definitive outcome was far more than a mere procedural defeat or a minor setback in palace politics. It was a devastating, deeply personal blow leveled directly at her carefully guarded pride and her fierce maternal instincts. The total humiliating collapse of her meticulously prepared proposal for Laura Lopes felt less like a simple disagreement and more like an absolute silent veto against her overarching influence and legitimacy within the House of Windsor. As she forced herself to watch those priceless jewelry pieces, the very treasures she had desperately hoped to secure as a means to provide a shred of royal status, ancestral recognition, and financial security for her daughter, who had spent her entire life relegated to the vulnerable periphery of the royal household. Now being formally handed over to Catherine, a scalding, bitter wave of envy and deep-seated resentment surged violently within her chest. It was an agonizing pill to swallow. She found herself utterly consumed by the harrowing reality that despite having successfully ascended to the highest possible station as the reigning queen, she remained entirely frustratingly powerless to protect the basic interests of her own flesh and blood when pitted against an unyielding, archaic system of centuries-old dynastic dogma. The sharp, jarring contrast within the confines of the room at that precise moment manifested itself with vivid, agonizing clarity through the smallest subconscious gestures of the family members present. King Charles III leaned back slowly into the plush, regal cushions of his chair, the deep worried lines on his weathered face finally relaxing and smoothing out after hours of intense, exhausting emotional conflict. A few feet away, Princess Anne quietly and deliberately retracted the nib of her fountain pen with an immensely satisfied, triumphant demeanor. She did not bother to hide her victory. Instead, she allowed a slow, knowing glance to sweep across the room, lingering just long enough to fully savor the undeniable triumph of royal legitimacy and tradition over external ambition. The smug contentment and visible relief etched onto the faces of these staunch traditionalists acted like an impenetrable, invisible wall, completely isolating and ostracizing the Queen's agonizing presence. Unable to endure even a single second longer beneath what she perceived as those condescending sugar-coated gazes of silent mockery, Camilla abruptly bolted upright from her seat. The violent, sudden movement caused the heavy legs of the wooden chair to scrape harshly against the polished floorboards, producing a sharp, piercing screech that shattered the room's artificial serenity. Without uttering a single word of farewell to her husband or her in-laws, and entirely discarding the rigid mandatory protocols of a ritualistic bow to the sovereign, she gripped her designer clutch bag with a white-knuckled intensity, turned sharply on her heel, and strode out of the conference room. Her heels clicked with definitive furious steps against the floor as she abandoned the meeting, leaving behind the massive oak door to slam shut with a thunderous bang, echoing her rage through the palace corridors. Camilla's dramatic, furious walkout mid-meeting did absolutely nothing to alter the grand, calculated design of the royal machinery. If anything, her theatrical departure only served to further highlight the utterly permanent and irreversible nature of the historic decision that had just been codified. The rapidly receding sound of the Queen's frantic, angry footsteps echoing along the lengthy, portrait-lined corridor outside felt like a jarring, highly discordant note in a grand symphony, an unpleasant disruption that was just as quickly forgotten and dismissed amidst the palace's inherent gravity-defying solemnity. The final absolute decision of the Royal Council did vastly more than just permanently close the protracted, exhausting debates surrounding the vast private estate of the late Queen Elizabeth II. It sent an ironclad, unmistakable message to all factions within the palace regarding the newly established, impenetrable order of power. The position of Princess Catherine within the architecture of the British royal family's future had now been completely flawlessly anchored. She stood taller than ever before, emerging from the domestic storm as an inviolable, majestic symbol of stability and grace, perfectly poised and ready to lead the next historic chapters of the Windsor dynasty. After reading this story, do you believe Queen Camilla's abrupt walkout was merely a fleeting burst of anger or the beginning of a deeper rift in her relationship with King Charles III? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.